Think about the last time a message really stuck with you. Not a slide deck, not a framework or a long explanation, but something you still remember, like weeks after. Chances are it was a story, right? A moment, an example, or a situation that you could picture in your mind.
Exactly. We often forget the numbers, we often forget the facts, but we remember how something made us feel. And when it feels right and it helped us to understand something, that is when we then remember. So stories, in the end of the day, help us to connect information to real life. And that's quite a powerful skill in leadership.
It is. So welcome back to The Leadership Effect. I'm Camilla.
And I'm Catherine. This is where we talk about leadership as it happens in real life. Practical, human, and sometimes a bit messy, let's be frank.
Yeah, and that's why I love today's topics, because we're talking about storytelling, right?
Absolutely. It's not about a presentation trick or something only senior leaders need. Everyone needs the art of storytelling. And it's a leadership skill that helps you to connect information, that helps you to connect facts, and to help you to make sure that the message actually lands.
Yeah, because leaders are not just messengers of good or bad news. I mean, they really help people make sense of what's happening, right? Why it matters and what it means for them and what's the direction. And stories are one of the most effective ways to do that and to get that message to land.
Yeah, so in this episode, we'll talk about how storytelling works, why it's so important for leaders, and what actually good storytelling looks like in leadership. And most importantly, because we like practical, we want to show you how you can do it, what to avoid. And also we want to touch on how AI can help you in creating a story without replacing your judgment, without replacing your voice.
Exactly. And stories work because that's how we humans naturally understand the world. Our brains don't, well, at least mine, don't work in like bullet points and charts, but we think in experiences, we think in cause and effect. And situations we can imagine happening to us.
Yeah, that's why people often forget the detail of a strategy update, but remember a story that has been told by a leader. And I remember really quite clearly, and I'm a very detailed, very practical person, very sometimes quite tactical. And I remember as a facilitator, you obviously have to know the art of storytelling. It's how you bring things to life, how you bring concepts and frameworks to life. And I'm definitely not someone who's very natural at it, and I'm able to commit that now. And I remember the first time I had to do a presentation, and I think it was representing MBTI actually, and I was in front of 25 leaders, and I was stumbling my way through it and just said how it is. And I remember my old boss, he took me by my side and says, like, Catherine, this is something that you can work on. And he tried to, bless him, really tell me, like, think about a story in your mind that kind of like brings the message to life. And this is how I realized, like, oh shit, like I need to get better at storytelling so people actually get engaged in the story and in the information that I'm actually delivering. It's the same for leaders as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? I mean, with AI, it definitely makes it a little bit easier to do that. And as you said, we'll touch on that later today. But a good story really helps people answer three things. Why does this matter? What does that mean for me?
Yeah.
And where are we going next? And if you're able to answer all of these questions, people are going to feel grounded.
Yeah. And what is even more important as well with a story, if that story is able to elicit an emotional response like concern, relief, hope, excitement, people engage differently with it. They listen more closely, they remember things, and that is when you know you've got them.
Yeah. I mean, Catherine, you mentioned when we were discussing this podcast that you experienced a really strong kind of experience of storytelling at this conference. Can you share that with the audience?
Yeah, and it was funnily something that was really interestingly told. So it was really a really boring conference. A lot of customers were there. Sorry, not customers. A lot of service providers were there, especially from the accountancy world. And everyone was talking about all the information that they had, their services that they offer. It was kind of like one thing after another, and you kind of like, you could see them, or everyone kind of like
I hate that
nodding
conference.
off, and like, yeah, we've all been in all those conferences. And then suddenly this lady came on stage, and I hope I can kind of like tell the story as she did, but obviously she had the hardest job. End of the conference, everyone was tired, everyone had gone through all these 7 presentations that were really, really boring. And I thought like, oh, this poor lady stands between dinner or drinks and the audience.
Yeah.
But what she did, she basically got on the job, and she was from another accountancy firm. And I said, like, oh, here we go again, all this presentation. But she started by saying that she didn't bring a big presentation, and instead she wanted to tell us about how the government works. So everyone was like, who? What is happening here? And she said, like, so every 10 years, the government does this big change in taxation laws and in regulations. And she was going on about and say kind of like why the government is doing that. But she said like, oh, I don't really want to bore you with the detail, but what I want to tell you, and you're probably wondering, why is this interesting? Why am I telling you about that this every 10 years it changes and why should it interest you is because now we have near year 9. And if you haven't thought about how these different changes impact your clients and your work, then come to me and we'll talk about it.
Oh, what a great hook.
And everyone was kind of like hooked on the floor, and everyone were like, great. First of all, it was only 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Second of all, like, shit. We are in like next year, everything is changing, and we haven't really thought about these changes. And I don't even know how it impacts my clients.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, she was obviously the busiest lady at drinks and dinners.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, and what really stands out about this story is that it wasn't polished or dramatic. Well,
it was dramatic,
could
actually.
be dramatic.
Yeah.
But it wasn't trying to impress anyone, but it was just simple, human, and very clear. And people could kind of got this urgency feeling of, like you said, wow, we need to do something.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting because she didn't come with a big presentation. She didn't take things, but she commanded attention by telling a story. And I mean, it was a true story as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that is kind of like one simple way how you can then use storytelling actually to frame challenges as a journey instead of a demand. It's just kind of like, where are we coming from? What's the problem or obstacle that we are facing? And what are we learning to move forward?
Yeah. But let's make this quite practical, because there might be someone in the audience who are thinking like, but storytelling doesn't really relate to me because I don't stand, like, I'm not on stage giving speeches. But here's the thing, like, storytelling can be used every day. It can be used in a meeting, it can be used with an individual, it can be used for speeches as well and presentations.
It can be used to create your personal brand in the end of the day, your leadership brand.
It shows up in everyday leadership moments, and every time you explain a decision, basically.
Yeah, I remember, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, we haven't planned for this, but do you remember when we were at PepsiCo and there was this, and we had this career conversation, and it was we had this not career conversation, we had basically someone presenting kind of like what was their career journey.
Okay.
And we had one person in there, I don't want to mention their names because obviously anonymity, but it was really great. He came across before that as a little bit cold and distance, very American, but he was in this career conversation and talked about his early careers and showed actually that he done a really big mistake in front of the CEO of the company, right? Can you remember that?
That was I think if it was the previous CEO, I would have been super scared because that was Indranj.
Yeah, it was. And he basically, it was kind of like a shit, hire or getting fired moment for him in his career. And the way he's told the story, I don't want to divulge this because it's not my story to tell, but the way he did it, everyone was like, oh my God, like he gone through this. And he showed really vulnerability by telling that story and how he did it. And it was incredible. And like from that moment, everyone hooked. And I think it showed a very different side of him, which makes a very different impact of how he landed with his team.
But if you think about like how he did it, he did it as a journey, almost talking about, you know, his early career, where he came from, the challenge, the obstacle that he was facing, and then probably something on what he learned as he moved or progressed his career, right?
Absolutely. And it shows that there wasn't a big kind of like presentation that he held. It was just kind of like showing who he actually was.
Yeah. And I think, you know, leaders often underestimate this kind of, you know, the power of these small stories. So a short reflection, a learning from the past, a moment where something didn't go as planned. You know, these leadership moments can feel so much more human and more trustworthy than anything else.
Yeah, and remember, kind of like, it doesn't have to be a flashy story. It's authenticity is really important when it comes to that, and it's much more important than the perfect story, right?
So let's make this practical, because I do want to give our listeners something to use as they go out of this session. So let's talk about how we actually build those stories, because the good news is that most stories are quite simple in their shape, or the shape that they follow. So if you're thinking, oh my God, I'm not creative, don't worry, you don't need to be super creative, but you need to be clear. You need to be clear in your story.
Yeah, there is actually an American author, but he developed a framework in this book, The Simple Shape of Great Stories. And if you read a lot of chick flick books, you can recognize some of these stories as well, right? It's Kurt Vonnegut, and he developed this framework where he creates a plot, and he's got 7 different plots, but I want to show a couple of them. I want to actually describe them and do a little recording. So keep with me while I'm trying to open up my
So he has 7 stories. We're not going to cover all of them, but if you don't want to find the rest of them, we'll make sure to put the name of them in the show notes, so that you can use them if you want. And then once we've gone through the shapes, we'll also talk a little bit about how AI can actually help you create some of these stories.
Exactly. So we basically have a graph here which shows good fortune, say GF, and we've got ill fortune. In the middle, we draw a line which begins the start of a story and then the end of a story. Now, the first plot is, and I'm going to do that in red, is, we call that man in the hole. Yeah. So basically, things start off fine. So we start off here in the middle, then they go downhill.
So something goes wrong.
Yeah, and then they improve again, and happy ending is there.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So in a leadership moment, this might sound something like, we were doing really, really well. It might be a project. It might be a service you're delivering to a customer. And then we hit a big challenge. And here's what we learned. And this is how we're moving forward.
Exactly. Then the other one, and I should have used red for that, is boy meets girl. So here, things going okay, then they slightly improve, and then they go downhill, and then suddenly they go up again.
So in leadership, this often shows up when teams start working better together, or when a new way of working unlocks better results. So it's really useful when you want to highlight collaboration, alignment, or why change actually helps people do better work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Then the third one, and the last one that we're going to go through, is the Cinderella one. Here things start really tough in stages, and they slowly improve until we are in the fortune, go up, but then they go down again until they go up again. So that is what we call Cinderella.
Yeah. And this is really powerful when you want to emphasize that progress is not a straight line, because it rarely is, right? So leaders often use this kind of shape when teams feel discouraged, because it helps people understand that setback does not mean failure. It means learning, right? And that they are part of the journey.
Yeah.
So the key here isn't a label. It's having a clear beginning, a clear challenge, and a clear direction forward so that people can relate and follow the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is really interesting because storytelling can also go wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if you're not careful. So a common mistake is in all these plots, if you are quite vague, if the story doesn't have a clear point, if people leaving confused, and instead of alignment, you create vagueness, confusion, frustration because they don't get the full picture. So be really clear when you're telling the stories, and then details matter.
Yeah, it does. And another mistake to make is if it doesn't match reality, people cannot relate to it. Because the thing with the story is that you want people to think, to understand it, and to emotionally connect with it, right? So
absolutely.
Talking about opportunity when people feel super overwhelmed can create a distance and not a trust.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And another pitfall is also if you are centering the story around yourself. For example, a leader spent most of the time just talking about themselves, about how hard the decision was for them, how much pressure they were under, and how well they handled it. Then people don't walk away with thinking about the message. They walk away thinking like, but what about me? Where do I fit in this story?
Yeah.
So
good leadership storytelling is not about, look at me.
I'm great.
About, here is how this connects us. It's from the I to the we, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk about AI.
Let's talk about AI. I do. A lot of leaders are curious and cautious, I would say at the same time, on how we can use AI for this, right?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because as we get more into content creation, obviously, and we use AI sometimes as well, but I become super cynical when I see people using AI in storytelling, because sometimes I get like, oh, you can see this is written with AI. But AI can be a really good tool to help you find a story or brainstorm a story or get it out, but it doesn't replace how you use a story.
No, it does not. And I know we've already done kind of one episode on AI, but remember, like, AI does not have the context. It does not know your team. It doesn't know your culture. It doesn't know what people are worried about right now. So it can't judge timing and it can't judge emotions. But I think, to your point, Catherine, you can let it help you shape the story, right? You can use it to outline the story and simplify the message and check if your points are clear to different audiences.
Yeah, exactly. And also, one thing that AI can't do is bringing your own kind of like flavor to the story. It's your story. You need to own it. AI can help you shape it a little bit, but it can't make you the protagonist of the story if it's not your story to tell.
But at the same time, I want to say using AI is not cheating. Like it's like you're going to do a difficult calculation and you say, I'm not going to use a calculator because that's cheating. Like that's ridiculous, right?
No, it's about using judgment at the end of time. And if you combine judgment with a smart tool like AI, you can communicate quite clearly and thoughtfully, not by necessarily saying more, but being able to say what actually matters.
Yes, definitely. So to be very, very practical, whether you prefer to talk or whether you prefer to write to AI, you could give AI a prompt saying, I'm in this situation, I'm going to create a story, and then you talk about the story in your own words, and then you help AI give you the first outline or the first draft, and then, like we said, it doesn't know context, culture, anything. Make it your own, right? That's when you finesse it, but it can help you really get started, and it's going to help you get to the end point much quicker, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And as we said before, it doesn't have to be the big dramatic story. It might be just a short reflection, a recent situation your team will recognize, or a lesson that you have learned along a way. And you can see that often when you're going on LinkedIn, where people take a situation and say, like, actually, this was a situation and this is my reflection. This is kind of like how it reminds me of leadership, how it reminds me of this and how it reminds me of that. And I find that quite nice, actually, how people use that. And I'm more able to engage in that rather than someone just says, like, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And if it helps out, sketch it. Use AI to sketch that story and refine it and deliver it in your own words. And I think that is the most important part of it.
Practice makes perfect, and not that it needs to be perfect, but something that you're comfortable with. Because and you know, practice in, if you're going to do this in face to face in a room, then practice also with using your phone and film yourself and watch it. I know it's super uncomfortable, but it really helps. But practice and practice so that the story becomes yours, so that you can put more of your personality in it. That will just really make a huge difference. Because when storytelling is done right, it becomes one of the strongest leadership tools that you have.
Yeah. And the goal isn't to sound impressive. It's to be understood.
Exactly. But it helps people understand direction and build trust and create alignment, and especially during change, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Camilla, what do we want the leaders to do as well?
Well, before your next team meeting, then ask yourself, what's the story behind what I'm asking people to do? And then use storytelling in that meeting to tell them.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's it for today's episode. As always, I would encourage you to look in the show notes for some tips and tricks. Follow us, subscribe, and lead with curiosity
and courage.